Hello, Marc Hassler from Schroders. Can you explain us your view about the risk about climate for investors?
Climate change, we think, is going to be one of the defining themes for investors in the years and decades ahead. Every economy, every sector, every business will be impacted by the disruption that we'll see from climate change. Whether that's through policies that address a transition to a low carbon economy or the actual implications of temperatures rising, every business model will be in one way or the other affected by that. The way to think about it is largely on a scale from transition risk to physical risk, or the transition to a low carbon economy, much like what is outlined in the Paris Agreement in 2015, where almost 200 countries pledged to limit global temperature increase to less than 2 degrees centigrade, or actually 1.5 degrees to be precise, or the physical implications of it. And either way, this is going to play out somewhere on that scale, and every business is going to be affected. We try to put tools in place that help us address these risks and figure out where's the disruption ahead, where are going to be the winners and losers from these changes.
We saw that the US stepped out of the climate deal from Paris. Are you still hopeful that the total deal will be successful?
Absolutely. So clearly the US is one of the largest emitters, one of the top 3 emitters globally. So with them retreating, that's clearly not a good sign. But if you actually look at the grassroots movements, especially in the US on a federal level, these movements are actually very, very strong. There's clear support for a Paris-like agreement. So even though the Trump administration is pulling out, I think there's a strong grassroots movement that is happening. I'm actually supporting climate action, much like the Green New Deal that we see that is gaining more and more popularity.
What does it mean for the asset allocation? Will it also have big impacts for investors?
Ultimately, for investors, what it comes down to is risk-adjusted returns, and climate change is one of the number one defining risks, and hence also an opportunity for investors. We think asset allocation will change accordingly as the industry develops and better understands the risk associated with it. And because the issue really is there's no template. This hasn't happened before. This is uncharted territory in many ways. So we need to think about this differently and really understand the risks that are there from a first principles logic almost, rather than looking back 20, 30 years and think about how we've done this in the past, because frankly, it's never happened before.
Of course, US is not the only party that's not more in the Paris Agreement. Also, many African countries, and maybe Russia or Asian countries, don't also participate in the climate agreement. What's your view on that?
What we've seen is that after Paris Agreement COP21 in 2015, we've had the COP24 in Poland last year, which had as a mission to come up with an operational manual for the Paris Agreement, how to actually come up with the rules and how to implement the Paris Agreement into reality. As we now have COP25 come up December in Madrid in Spain, there's one last thing that's outstanding, which is Article 6, which is essentially a global market mechanism for trading carbon emissions. Whether that's actually going to be achieved or not is a different question. It's probably a very technical topic, and whether that's going to be solved during meeting is a bit tricky. But we think that's the last piece that is missing to actually implement the Paris Agreement, ultimately lead to success to transition to a low carbon economy.
One last question: do you think that in the long future, maybe oil companies won't exist anymore?
It's difficult to tell. We just had a session on climate disruption, and clearly there's a stranded asset risk of sorts that is associated with that. Ultimately, business models will probably need to change as new technologies emerge, and clearly renewable energy is one of the key technologies, whether it's solar PV, whether it's onshore wind, offshore wind, which expect to grow dramatically. So these industries will grow and some industries will shrink. Whether companies will be around or not is difficult to say, but as companies change their business models, they will become more resilient to these risks and hence be either successful or not successful.
Okay, Marc Hassler, thanks for the interview.
Thank you much.